Hello, money and banking students. We are officially 1/4 of the way done with the course. We now enter week 3, so I should have everything from week 2 graded by Tuesday. Do make sure to wrap everything up for week 2 and just stay on top of things. As a reminder, you can take those quizzes twice. But coming up this week, we have your first paper due. So I'm going to ask you to do a stock analysis of a commercial bank or a publicly traded bank. Kind of give you some exposure related to the chapters we're looking at this week with 8, 9, and 10. We look at this week with chapter 8. That should be a little bit of review from a finance class. Look at the general overview of the stock market. It talks about the characteristics of stocks, the idea that you can make money on stocks through dividends or capital gains. It discusses the different markets of stocks and how they're traded. Mentions the IPO, prospectus, the due diligence process, how Wall Street firms make their money from issuing the IPOs. And then, also looks at some of the index and finally tying back to what we call efficient market hypothesis. That is that there are so many people competing for information that any given point in time in the market that security should reflect the current accurate price in the market. So if good news comes out, the stock price will go up. Bad news comes out, the stock price will go down. And if you believe in all the different forms, even weak form, medium to strong, there's really no way that you can outperform the market consistently over time, because your best bet is just to put your money in an S&P 500 mutual fund and just write it out, because a lot of professional money managers have a hard time beating the market in the long run. The next two chapters, chapters 9 and 10, start to get a little bit more into how commercial banks can hedge against risk. So especially chapter 9, they're going to talk about foreign currency. It's, in my opinion, the largest market in the world. Obviously, if you have an obligation in a foreign currency that you have to make due in a certain amount of time, you're exposed to currency risk. And that could be that if I have to go out and buy euros or pounds 6 months or a year from now, or have an obligation for those, and let's say that the pound or euro appreciates in value, it means it gets more expensive. It's going to require more American dollars to purchase that currency. At the same time that if the price goes down, you could benefit from that, but that's a risk. So do you want to take that risk? So much the financial markets are engaged in hedging, for those that have some underlying obligation or asset want to hedge that risk. So they talk a lot about this chapter about you can't do it on a balance sheet through matching, but another option is maybe to engage in a forward contract, that there's a specific price that you agree upon on delivery, say for the price of British pounds 6 months from now. And parties would enter that agreement, and that would reduce some of that potential liability of changes in the price of the currency. The last chapter, chapter 10, deals with the derivative markets, and this is a little bit more technical read. You may have been exposed to this a little bit in finance, and we'll talk more about these different types of markets throughout the readings in the textbook. But basically, a derivative derives its value from some other underlying asset. If you were to take out a derivative and not have that underlying asset, basically you're just gambling. But if you know that you're going to get paid in euros 6 months from now, or you have an obligation in euros, what you may also do is take out a futures contract. And with the futures contract, you're basically betting on one position one way or the other. So I'll give you an example just from like a wheat farmer's perspective. Their underlying asset is the wheat. So the farmer is worried about 6 months from now when he goes to the market, what will the price of wheat be? So if the price of the wheat goes down, he's going to lose money. So what he would probably do is put out a futures contract that says, I'm going to bet that the price of wheat goes down. So that way, 6 months from now, if the price of wheat does drop, the farmer is compensated in what's called a margin account. So he's going to lose a little bit when he goes to the market and sells the wheat at a lower price, but he's going to win in the market from the futures trade. So basically they're hedging or offsetting. You can think of futures and also what they call about options. It's kind of like almost like insurance contracts. It's an insurance contract as long as you have that underlying asset. As I mentioned before, if you don't have any underlying asset, really you're just gambling. You're betting on which way the position is going to go. So those are settled daily in things called market to market. If you do a futures contract, options, there have to be options writers that hope that they write this contract, but you don't take advantage of it. But the same thing, if you need to buy a particular currency and you're concerned that the price is going to go way up, you might do what's called a call, the right to buy a currency at a specific price in the future. The other type is called a put, the right to sell at a specific price in the future. So depending on what your position is and your needs, you would hedge in certain ways. All right. Something new introduced in this chapter that you may have not heard in previous courses is called a swap. Most common one they mentioned there is the interest rate swap, where someone maybe swaps fixed dollar payments for floating dollar payments. Again, they could do this on a balance sheet, but they may want to engage in a swap contract that they don't want to change their balance position. And a lot of days, these are done through brokers in the swaps. And they did mention the textbook, if the credit default swaps were a main problem why we had the subprime crisis and the meltdown, because a lot of these parties that wrote these credit default swaps, like AIG and others, didn't have the capital to really commit to say that these things, if they did happen, we'd be able to cover these losses. Well, they just speculated that real estate was never going to go down in value, these mortgages wouldn't fail, made a lot of money on writing all these credit default swaps, anticipating they would never have to pay out on them. But the reality is when it did happen, they had to, and it caused a huge financial crisis. But we were able to do some things through the Federal Reserve, and just finally, almost 10 years later, we're getting things that are a little bit more stable in the markets, where we see the markets at all-time high, unemployment's relatively low, and it looks like our economy is growing at a good pace right now. Not a great pace, but a good pace. So that is good news. So, all right. If you do have any questions this week, do email me via the course in Canvas. I'll try to get back to you that day or the following day. But otherwise, have a great week, and I will talk to you online. Bye.